Revenge films.
I lived with my husband, just the two of us. My main concern was that my cooking was considered bad. Honestly, I didn't think it was that bad, but whenever my husband ate my food, he would always say,
"What is this awful meal? How could you feed me this?"
or even spit it out. Of course, I always taste my food while cooking, and since I grew up in a single-parent household, I've been cooking since I was a student. My mother taught me how to season, and I even cooked for friends when they stayed over, but no one ever told me my cooking was bad. Still, my husband would always make a disgusted face after eating, and I started to wonder if everyone had just been too nice and polite to say anything. Not long ago, my husband went to a colleague's house, and when he came back, he immediately said to me,
"Today I had my colleague's wife's cooking, and it was like night and day compared to yours. I really must be unlucky to have a wife like you. Ugh, I wish I'd married someone who's good at cooking."
All I could say was, "I'm sorry, I really do try my best." Then he replied even more condescendingly,
"You need to practice more."
Yes. Every time I heard him say things like that, I became more and more insecure, and eventually I started to hate cooking altogether. One day I found out that my husband's company was holding a family event, and the wives were expected to bring homemade dishes. My husband told me I had to make something, but I didn't want to bring food that he always criticized as bad. So I told him I didn't want to go. However, he snapped back.
"That's not an option. If you don't go, I'll be the one embarrassed. Do you think it's better for your cooking to be embarrassing or for me to be embarrassed? Obviously, it's you. Stop whining and make something to bring tomorrow."
Left with no choice, I ended up making something for the event, feeling miserable about it. On the day of the event, I went to the gathering with my husband. The other wives had already set out their dishes, but I froze, terrified that in front of so many people, they might say my cooking was as bad as my husband always claimed. The lady approached me with a kind smile and said, "You're Mr. Parker's wife, right? Did you bring something to share?" Nervously, I replied, I did, but..." and reluctantly placed my dish on the table. To my surprise, the other wives all exclaimed, "Wow! Oh, this looks amazing! It's so beautifully presented, too!" Even though the other wives were complimenting my dish, I was still terrified that once they tasted it, they'd find it awful. That's when my husband, smirking, butted in and said,
"Oh, don't let the appearance fool you. This isn't good at all. She's terrible at cooking. I'm always criticizing her, and honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if this ruined everyone's appetite."
He looked like he was enjoying the thought of my cooking being humiliated, and I was horrified. But instead of agreeing with him, the wives kept praising my dish. Then, during lunch, they tried it and exclaimed, "This is amazing! How did you season it? Is there a secret ingredient?" Even the wife of my husband's colleague, the one he'd visited recently, joined in, complimenting my cooking. Before I knew it, wives from other groups started gathering around me, and my table was full of people chatting about my dish. Meanwhile, my husband kept trying to mock me, saying things like,
"Her cooking is totally inedible. Seriously."
But his colleagues just laughed at him, saying,
"If you think this is bad, there's definitely something wrong with your taste buds."
As the compliments kept coming, my husband's expression grew darker and darker. He spent the rest of the event sulking while everyone else praised my cooking. In the end, I ended up being the center of attention throughout the entire recreation event. But as soon as we got home, my husband exploded with anger, yelling,
Don't get carried away. Your cooking is awful, and no one knows that better than I do. Just because you got a little praise doesn't mean it's any good.
His words hit me hard. I couldn't understand why he felt the need to say such hurtful things, and it left me feeling completely devastated. One day, one lady approached me for a chat. She was the one who had been especially complimentary about my cooking at the recreation event. She said, "Miss Parker, have you ever thought about opening a restaurant? Your cooking is absolutely amazing." "What? Me? No way. Opening a restaurant is something for professionals," I replied, caught off guard. "I honestly think your skills are on par with the pros, and your plating is so elegant. Where did you learn to do that?" "Oh, it's just from copying things I've seen on Instagram," I said, feeling a little embarrassed. "Even so, the fact that you can replicate it so well shows you have real talent. If you ever decide to open a restaurant, I'd be more than happy to invest in it." "What?" Her offer completely took me by surprise, but part of me couldn't help wondering if my cooking, constantly ridiculed by my husband, might actually be good enough for others to enjoy. So I suggested trying out a one-day pop-up first, and she was excited about the idea. I considered telling my husband, but knowing he'd just dismiss my cooking as awful again, I decided to keep it to myself. With some of the other wives volunteering to help as staff, I decided to rent a space and try a one-day pop-up restaurant. Word about my cooking must have spread because the place was flooded with people, far more than I had expected. Everyone who tried my food had nothing but praise. They said, "This is amazing! Oh, it's such a waste to do only a one-day pop-up. If you need help preparing, we'll pitch in as much as you need. Just open a proper restaurant already." I was overwhelmed with joy and immediately asked the lady who had brought up the idea if she'd help me make it happen. She was more than happy to support me, and everything seemed to be falling into place. Finally, it was time to tell my husband. Luckily, he hadn't heard about the pop-up. But that day, he was in an even fouler mood than usual. During dinner, he slammed my food onto the floor and yelled,
"How many times do I have to tell you to stop feeding me this garbage? Don't let a bit of praise go to your head. You should be grateful I even married someone as worthless as you. Now get on your knees and apologize for serving me this crap."
I was stunned, his cruel words cutting deeper than ever before. In that moment, I realized that my husband didn't really care about whether my cooking was good or bad. He was just looking for any excuse to put himself above me, belittle me, and take out his frustrations on me. Then he said,
"Why aren't you on your knees apologizing? You know, if you want, we can just get a divorce."
I responded calmly, "Fine, let's get a divorce."
"Huh? What are you talking about?"
He laughed, surprised.
"Someone as worthless as you wouldn't survive without me."
I told him I've decided to open a restaurant with the help of one of the wives who's offering to invest, so I don't need you anymore. He didn't know how to react, completely stunned. But I had already made up my mind. I packed my things, left the house, and went to my parents' place. A few days later, I brought him the divorce papers. He angrily filled out the divorce papers, yelling,
"Your restaurant is gonna fail, and you'll come crawling back to me. I know it."
But the reality was far from his words. My restaurant was fully booked every day with long lines. There was no way I was going to go back to him. By the way, I later heard from some of the other wives about what my ex-husband had said after the divorce. I had told them about the way he had treated me throughout our marriage. Then word got around to the husbands, and they all said,
"So you were emotionally abusing such a great wife who could cook so well? You're the worst! I can't believe we ever worked with someone like you!"
He ended up getting completely shunned, couldn't do his job anymore, and his performance dropped so much that he was reassigned to warehouse work. The other wives advised me to get compensation for the emotional abuse, and they introduced me to a lawyer, and I was able to successfully claim what I was owed. My husband, who had always looked down on me, ended up lonely while I was surrounded by supportive people. I'm sure he never saw that coming, but it was entirely his own fault.
How was today's video? If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, like, and leave a comment. Stay tuned for more.